Can everyone hear? Yes? All right.
Yep.
So I was going to say, this is, thank you to Rabbi Sassoon for allowing us to remember two people who we all remember, I think, with affection and with not many, but all the meetings we had with the two people who were commemorated were very special. So we say Zichronam Livracha. Last time, we missed something, which I promised to explain, but we didn't get round to it. So I'll explain it now, because tonight's is a new topic, and yet it does link up with what we've been doing before. The two previous had to do with the relationship, or really the distinction between public and individual and private prayer. And we went in at the deep end with rabbinic sources, right? Which is odd. And only after that, we surveyed some biblical sources. And it should have been the other order if one goes chronologically and in order of importance. But I said I'll explain why we did that. And the reason is that in a certain sense, Tzibur has a very special status. And so I thought we should start with the congregational prayer. And there's very little of it, as we saw 2 weeks ago, in the Torah. Most of the prayers described or recorded in the Torah are private prayers. We examined 3 examples of communal prayer, and they, of course, were all late, we presume, Second Temple. So therefore, if we needed to do justice to public prayer, we had no choice but to begin with rabbinic sources. I want to clarify that in case people went away with questions and bewilderment, because it is an odd way to go about things. All right, now that's out of the way, we can turn to tonight. The title is A Trip to a Participatory Past. In many shuls today, speaking from personal experience, maybe others have experienced this too, you don't know that you're in tefillah b'tzibur at all. Around you, people are mumbling, everyone reading at their own pace, and suddenly someone will say a few words very loudly and in a very disturbing tone. And I guess if people are used to it, perhaps it seems normal. But I'm sure some of us will never be able to get used to this. But above all, it doesn't really satisfy the ancient concept of tefillah b'tzibur. Tefillah b'tzibur meant that everyone was doing it together. Not just in one building and each one doing tefillah b'yachid and now and again stopping in order to answer something here and there, ad kaddish, no. In fact, I was in shul once, happened a second time, but I'd rather forget the other times. One was enough. And I saw someone get up and do his whole Amida while the Torah was being read. Completely impervious to what was going on. And I thought, why does he come here? And then I said, no, well, I shouldn't ask because everyone has a right to come to shul. and he's not making a noise, so I won't say anything. But that's to do with education. People haven't thought about Tefillah B'Tzibur and what it meant. So not just for polemical purposes, but because it seems to me that we often forget what the service was like once upon a time. So here we go. First comes from a Mishnah in Tractate Sotah. On that day, Rabbi Akiva interpreted the verse. Then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song to the Lord and said, saying. Many are familiar with the Hebrew. It's here. Vayomaru lemor. Az yashir Moshe u'bnei Yisrael et hashira hazot l'Hashem vayomaru lemor. The word saying, lemor, seems redundant, coming right after the word said. What does it mean? They said, saying? So why the word saying? It teaches that Israel would respond. It says, I know, it says repeat. That's what ArtScroll wrote, and it's wrong. It's respond, not repeat. Everything after Moses, as is done when reciting Hallel. That is the explanation for saying. Rabbi Nehemiah says they sang the way the Shema is recited and not the way Hallel is recited. Is everything here perfectly transparent? Maybe not. So let's elaborate a little bit. First of all, it is remarkable to see these words by Yomaru Lemor. You would expect, Az Yashir Moshe Bnei Yisrael et Hashira Hazot Ashira Hashem. And we say this based on what? Based on other shiras, other songs in the Torah. For instance, a famous one is in Numbers chapter 21. Az Yashir Yisrael et Hashira Hazot Ali Be'er Enula, right? The song of the well. There's no Vayomaru or Lemor. They sang, and then immediately you get the song. So really both words seem redundant, but especially the double tautology that we have here. So therefore, the rabbis wanted to know what it was all about. And they said, we have to decode it. It's telling us how they recited it. So there are two opinions. One says, this is where the participatory thing comes in. Moses said, whatever he said, it doesn't specify here exactly what Moses said. It just says here, Aharav shel Moshe al kol davar v'davar. Moses said things and they responded just like people reciting the Hallel on the festivals. But Rabbi Nehemiah disagreed. He said, no, the way that they recited the Shirat Hayam was the way that one reads the Shema and not the way one reads the Hallel. Well, how is Hallel read and how is Shema read? For this, we have to turn to the Tosefta. We have here quite a chunk of the Tosefta, even though some of it is not directly related to the prayers, but somehow these texts are combined. They're combined here in the Tosefta and also in the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, there's a different version of it. The first part deals with Eov, believe it or not. So I thought it was very neat, since last time we also had the good fortune to talk about Eov. And Eov enters into so much of our tradition, and here he also figures. Now I should add one thing. Go back to the Mishnah, and you'll see it begins with the words, on that day Rabbi Akiva interpreted, on that day. Does it mean on a particular day, or is it like saying one day? So in the Gemara, actually, in Tractate Berachot, I think it's 28, there's a story there about a revolt that happened in Yavne. After the Second Temple was destroyed, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, he got permission from the Romans, with whom he was on very good terms, because Gemara tells us that he supported Vespasian and he predicted that he would be the next emperor. In other words, he did not join the rebels who revolted against Rome. In fact, they were his arch enemies. The whole story is in Gittin and in Abot Binatan. We can't go into it now. It's a very interesting story of how divided the Jerusalem population was between those, some people call them the pacifists, or others call them the pragmatists. And the extremists who, for whatever reason, it's hard now really to tell what their motives were, but they fought to the death, and they wanted to kill Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as well. Anyway, he was taken out by his students in a coffin, and the Biryoneh, who the rabbis called the thugs, but they were the rebel party, they wanted to pierce his corpse. They wanted to open the coffin and pierce him. They said, we don't believe he's dead. And the students had very smart and had the presence of mind to say, that will endear you to your followers, won't it? To say that you pierced the corpse of a great teacher. So for a moment, they were distracted, and the two students smuggled the body out of the Jerusalem, and they went to Vespasian, and then the famous conversation between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the Roman emperor, and well, he wasn't the emperor then, that's not correct. He was the general who had been sent to quell the rebellion. And so he tells him, give me Yavne at least. So he gave him Yavne and said, we won't attack Yavne. And he went there and opened a yeshiva. That's Yavne. And after Rabbi Yochanan's death, for some reason or other, there was no one to fill the void. And Rabban Gamliel, who was the grandson of the famous Rabban Gamliel, somehow or other rose to the top, and he took over. And he was dictatorial and somewhat despotic. And people couldn't stand the way he treated people. And he was very elitist. He wouldn't allow people to study in his yeshiva unless they passed certain tests, not to see how much they knew, but all kinds of tests. And he pried into their personal lives, and people one day got fed up and said, enough of him, we will replace him. So they replaced him with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, because Elazar ben Azariah was very neutral. Everyone liked him, and he never had got into squabbles. He was not an enemy of Rabban Gamliel, nor a friend. So they thought he would be a safe choice. And on that day, there was great freedom in the yeshiva suddenly. Everyone could speak. No one felt muzzled or censored. And they all started to speak. This is the story in the Gemara. And that was the day on which all these things were said. And that's what it means, bo bayom. Some scholars are not happy with that. They say, yes, there's an element of historicity, but some of it reads like legend. And therefore, they think bo bayom just means on a certain day. Take your pick. So now we go to the Tosefta. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Ben Patiri, it says in the Bible about that Eov said to God, Hai el hesir mishpati. I promise you that God has warped my justice. In other words, he hasn't dealt fairly with me. What does this teach you? It teaches you that since he took a promise, Hai el, it means he loved the king and he loved God. Rabbi Natan said, there's another verse which says, he is my salvation. That proves that Eov served God out of love. And why was this so important? Because the beginning of the book, it says, Eov was Yireh Elokim, was a God-fearer. So Rabbi Natan says, that's exactly what it says of the patriarch Abraham. Ne'emar Yireh Elokim be'Abraham, ve'ne'emar Yireh Elokim be'Eov. Ma Yireh Elokim asher be'Abraham me'ahava. How do we know that? Because it says in the book of Isaiah, Abraham ohavi. So we have biblical testimony that Abraham loved God. Even though in Genesis it says Yireh Elokim. In other words, Yireh shouldn't be translated fear. It means a God worshipper. You have to be very careful with that word Yireh. Often superficial translators give fear. Well, that's the nature of many languages. They have words with different shades and different connotations. And Yareh Elokim means God's worshipper. But it doesn't mean that he did it out of fear. At least that's the opinion here. So what are you going to say about all the complaints? Some of the things in the book of Job sound somewhat harsh and grating. Lo ne'emra ele metoch hamora. They were only expressions driven by mora. Mora, I suppose, does mean fear, but there's a big debate about what exactly is meant here by mora. If it's driven by fear, then what do you mean? That he was driven by love. So they say, no, the Yireh Elokim doesn't mean he feared God, it means he worshipped God out of love. But he had morah. He had a lot of terrible things impinging on his life. Very scary things that we spoke about last week. And so those things sometimes made him express himself in somewhat sharp tones. So that's all about Eov. The Mishnah, interestingly, has a different version of this discussion of Eov. If we were doing Eov, I would, of course, have quoted the Mishnah as well so that we could compare it. But those who are interested can compare the two, and we'll see it's different people who said it, and they reach their conclusions through different routes. Now comes our main point. Halacha bet. Darash Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva preached the following. When the Israelites came up from the sea, they wanted to sing a song. And Ruach HaKodesh descended upon them. And they said a song. But how did they say it? So, some say they said it like a child who recites the Hallel Bebeit HaSofer, at school. Now, this needs explanation. Ve'onin acharab al kol enyan ve'enyan. When a child recites for others, for adults, such as in a school, either because he's learning how to recite Hallel, or he is being a chazan. However, when a minor is a chazan, then he has to say each pasuk, and those who are joining him repeat every verse exactly the way he says it. So in other words, the child is only a prompter. He is not a real chazan. He's not a shaliach tzibur. Because the rabbis had a rule, kol she'eno mechoyav b'davar, eno motzi et harabim yedei chovata. Someone who himself is not obligated, he cannot fulfill the obligation of others. So, since a minor is not obligated to do most of the mitzvot, I say, he cannot really do it on behalf of others. What he can do is he can prompt them. But when he prompts, they have to repeat everything verbatim. So, everyone knew how Hallel was recited when a child was leading it. And therefore, he could just say it's just like a child in the school when he is prompting everyone and they repeat everything. So that would mean Moses said Ashir al Hashem, and the Jews repeated Ashir al Hashem. Moses said Oziv is Imrat Yah, and Israel said Oziv is Imrat Yah. The next Tana, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Yossi Aglili, said, no, that's not how they did it. They did it the way that an adult leads the Hallel in the synagogue, not in the school. This is the official. What happens? How is Hallel recited in the synagogue? We all know. Onina harab and Yan Rishon. So Moses said, Ashir al Hashem, ve'Yisrael amru Ashir al Hashem. Moshe amar Oziv is Imrat Yah, and Israel responded, Ashir al Hashem. So Ashir al Hashem is the refrain, and Moses says each pasuk, but they don't repeat it. They respond with the refrain. And this is called responsorial chant. Very, very ancient. Actually, it was taken over by many other groups, and it's well known that it went from the Jews to Syria, Antioch, and that's where it's recorded. After the temple was destroyed, it's recorded there that this are the two ways that services were held in the synagogue. Some were done responsorially. That's the one we are dealing with now. Then there's another method, which we'll come to in a moment. Rabbi Nehemiah Omer. We met Rabbi Nehemiah already. What did he say? He said, it's like reading the Shema in the synagogue. But he didn't explain, how is the Shema read in the synagogue? Do we know? Historically, how was it done? We know now how the Hallel was done. People didn't know the whole Hallel, but they could repeat one refrain, which was the first word of each chapter, and then you would go to the next chapter, and always the refrain, always responsorial. But Shema was not written that way. It was not read that way, sorry. Melamed shehaya Moshe poteach v'davar. Moses would say the first half, and Israel onin ahara v'gomrim emo. They would complete the verse. So Moses would say, Az Yashir, and the Israelites said, Ashir al Hashem. When Moses said, Oziv is Imrat Yah, they responded, Ze'eli ve'anvehu. Moshe Amar, Hashem ish milchama, and they said, Hashem Shema. This is how Shema was recited. So it was a shared enterprise. It was a real tefillah b'tzibur, everything. Shema, Hallel, and many other prayers, but these are the major ones which are recorded and documented. Now we turn to the Gemara. Gemara is very similar, but we have the English for it. So that is going to be helpful. The rabbis taught in a Baraita. On that day, Rabbi Akiva expounded the following. This is the third version, you realize, but it's more expanded. When Israel came up from the sea, they set their sights on reciting a song. And how did they recite the song? It was in the manner of an adult leading the Hallel, and the congregation responding after him with the refrain. Thus, Moses said, I shall sing to Hashem, and they said, I shall sing to Hashem. Moses said, for he is exalted above the arrogant, and they said, I shall sing to Hashem. So all they said was, I shall sing to Hashem, after every stanza that Moses sang. So this is all the people needed to know. Of course, it answers the old question, how did they all know the song? Well, we're told they didn't. Moses knew it. They only had to learn the refrain, and they responded the end of every verse. After Moses said it, they responded with Ashir al Hashem. But he said the entirety of each verse. Rabbi Eliezer, son of Yosef the Galilean, says they recited the song in the manner of a minor leading the Hallel, with the congregation repeating everything that he says. Thus, Moses said, I shall sing to Hashem, and they said, I shall sing to Hashem. Moses then said, for he is exalted above the arrogant, and they too said, for he is exalted above the arrogant, and so forth. Rabbi Nehemiah says, they recited the song in the manner of a cantor leading the recitation of the Shema in the synagogue, where he begins first and they respond after him. Next source is a Mishnah in Megillah. Now we must notice the first 4 words of this Mishnah in Hebrew before we go to the English. See what it says? En porsin et Shema. This is the authentic reading, and it's in, you see, look at the manuscript of the Yerushalmi, and even in some modern Mishnayot, they also still have En porsin et Shema. Now, we have here the comment of Albeck in Hebrew. I'm going to translate that before we go on to translating the entire Mishnah, because our chief interest is in those first 4 words. What does it mean, Porsin et Shema? So this is Albeck's commentary. It was their custom when they read Shema. Look at his words. It was their custom, not our custom. So he already doesn't follow this custom. He lived about 100 years ago. He's not following it anymore. So at some point along the line, this whole system was reformed. But he gives it away when he says it was their minhag. He doesn't say it is the minhag. No, he says it was their minhag, distancing himself from it. The Chazan would read the first half of a verse, then he would stop, and the other half was recited by the congregation. For example, the Chazan would say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, and the congregation would respond, Hashem Echad. And so they continued with all the parshiyot. And this way of reading Shema with the blessings was called Pores et Shema. Pores means dividing. You know, on Pesach night, we have the Perusa, the split matzah, split in half. It's called Perusa. Same word. Now you look at the same Mishnah as it's quoted in the Vilna Shas. I say in the Vilna Shas because if you look at the older printed Shas, for instance, the Venice Shas of the 1520s, which was the first time the Shas was printed in its entirety, you look there, it has exactly the same. Porsim et Shema. It is an accusative. They divided the Shema. That's the way Shema is read. But look at what we have in the Vilna Shas, in Porsim al Shema. Now here we have a chicken and egg question. Was the Mishnah altered in order to conform to what had become the later practice, or was there another version of the Mishnah, and when later generations saw the words in Porsim al Shema, they didn't know what to do with it, and they came up with a very convoluted interpretation. We don't know which is which. We cannot trace it exactly. So what does the whole Mishnah say here? Mishnah is a very important Mishnah. It's about the requirement for a minyan. Certain things for which 10 are required, a minimum. That's called the quorum. What are these things? Now, this is not exhaustive, by the way. This Mishnah is not exhaustive, but it tells us many of the major rituals that need 10 to be present. So it starts off, we may not divide the Shema. That means we don't read the Shema in this way, which is the way it's read b'tzibur, not the way a private person obviously reads it, because then you can't do it antiphonally. By the way, that's the technical word for this kind of reading. Remember, responsorial is when the congregation responds to each sentence with one refrain, always the same refrain. But the leader says the whole verse, and the attendees just say a refrain. And the other is called antiphonal reading. An antiphonal reading is when it's divided up, the leader says half and then is silent and doesn't say the other half, and the congregation says the other half. So whoever says the first half does not say the second half. And those who say the second do not say the first half. So it's really shared, and it's really a joint effort and deserving of the name, Tefillah B'tzibur. Okay, but there are other things that require a minyan. So you cannot go before the ark to act as the chazan to recite the Amidah, prayer for the congregation. What we would say chazarah. There's no chazarah. A person can say the Amidah privately as an individual, but they cannot be a chazarat hashatz, without 10 people present. Also, the priests cannot lift their hands to recite the priestly blessing. nor can we have the public reading of the Torah, which is called Kriyat HaTorah. A person can privately read Torah and study Torah at home or anywhere. But Kriyat HaTorah, which is a special mitzvah in its own right, where people are called up and say brachot, and this is done publicly from a kosher Sefer Torah with all the ritual surrounding it. This can only be done if there are 10 present. Also, reciting the Haftarah, again with the brachot as a ritual. Nor do we make standing and sitting tributes at a funeral. Well, this is another custom which seems to have fallen by the wayside. They would stop 7 times on the way to the graveyard and put down the coffin, and then the leader would call to all those assembled and address them as Emdu Yekarim Amotu. My dear ones, please stand up. And then he would say a eulogy. Then they would move on. Then he would let them sit down or whatever. It's not absolutely clear, but it seems that they had to stand up for the eulogy, and then or maybe they could sit down for the eulogy. There's a little confusion here because it starts by saying Ma'amad Umoshav. But if they are walking towards the cemetery, they are standing. So why would he first tell them to stand? He should first tell them to sit. So that is why you'll see the commentators are a little bit confused. But I don't think we should be confused. I think it's just called Ma'amad Moshav. It doesn't mean it was done in that order. Probably they were walking along, and then the leader would say, sit down. They could sit while someone was called upon to give a eulogy. So the eulogies were not all given together, but this also gave some relief to the pallbearers, because often it was a very long walk, no cars or anything, to carry it on their shoulders, and this gave them a break. So they split up the eulogies. Some people think in later times, when coffins were taken on carriages, people had more money perhaps, they didn't need to do all this. And so little by little, it fell into desuetude. But when it was done, it could only be done if there were 10 people present. Otherwise, there was no Ma'amad Moshav. Birkat Avelim is a special bracha which is said in the house of mourning. And Tanchumei Avelim is another bracha, also to be found in Masechet Ketubot, I think Daf Chet. There's a discussion what exactly is the Birkat Avelim and what is Tanchumei Avelim, but it was a bracha that was said if there were 10 people present in the house of mourning. Otherwise, it could not be said. There's a strange comment in the Tur on this matter. He says, nowadays, we don't have either Birkat Shura or Birkat Rachba. Just like that, he just said we don't do it. This was a very huge reform, very quietly, without much ado, we just got rid of it. Without explanation, without excuse. Anyway, obviously in Talmudic times, it was of very great importance. Birkat Chatanim, that's the Sheva Brachot, to recite it at the chuppah. There must be also 10 present, including Chatan. Chatan is included. By the way, for the Birkat Avelim, the Avelim are not included. You have to have 10 non-mourners to be allowed to say that bracha. But at the wedding, Chatan is one of the 10. And lastly, the Zimun with God's name can only be said with 10. Well, that we still practice. Nobody has abolished that yet. Now, below this, there is a long commentary from ArtScroll. We preserved it, not because we're going to study it, we're not, because I think it's so completely off the mark and so extraordinary, but because it's so extraordinary, it's worth looking at. They tried to explain what in person al-Shema means. And they said, well, people came late to synagogue and they want to do a whole new performance. This is what they do. In short, they were struggling with it. It means that by the Middle Ages or late Middle Ages, it was completely forgotten, the person et Shema. How did such a fate befall a venerable custom, which was so well known that when they wanted to describe Moses singing his song, they told people, you know, it's just like what goes on in the synagogue. So everyone knew it. And well, it's 1,000 years later that people didn't know what it was anymore. Okay, that's for the historians to work out. It may have happened accidentally, or there may have been a deliberate plan to suppress the old tradition. And really, that did great damage to Tefillah B'tzibur. Now, there's more, the same subject in Sukkah. Now we'll go straight to the English. If a Canaanite slave, a woman or a minor, is reciting Hallel for someone, he responds after them whatever they say. And shame upon him. But even here it says a curse upon him. I think shame upon him is more accurate. But if an adult is reciting Hallel for him, he responds after him only the refrain, which is Hallelujah. Now we know what the refrain is for the Hallel. We weren't told that before. In a place where they have the custom to double the verses of Hallel, one should double them. That means the last verses from Odacha on. At least that's what the Gemara says. Where the custom is to recite a blessing, one recites a blessing, following always the local custom. It doesn't seem that it was widespread reciting any blessings for the mitzvot in early times. And it's interesting, it has survived in the oldest Hallel recitation, which is at the Haggadah. Talmud tells us this is the one Hallel that goes back to biblical times. Gilel it Kadesh Chag. Since time immemorial, the Hallel was recited, and that was the central part, in fact, of the Haggadah. Probably even older than any other part. No bracha, Ligmor et Hallel, because that couldn't be changed. That was sacrosanct. That's how it was always done. And I don't think that people said brachot. There's one Mishnah in Psachim which says something about a bracha for a korban. But it's very unlikely that this is historical. It's what the later rabbis were debating, what should have been said, what might have been said. And even there, you see, they're not sure what was said. But in temple times, I don't think there was such a thing as Birkat HaMitzvot. This is a very late concept. But you see here, this Mishnah, it says some people had a custom to say a bracha for Hallel. So this is the beginning. Anyway. Now the Gemara. The rabbis taught in a Braita. In truth, they said, a minor can recite the blessing on behalf of his father, and a slave can recite the blessing on behalf of his master, and a woman can recite the blessing on behalf of her husband. Nevertheless, the sages said, shame upon a man who is so unlearned that his wife and children must recite the blessing for him. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now we come to customs of the Hallel. As always, we are obliged to remark on these statements that come from a very different world. A, they equate women and slaves. Two, we had one a few weeks ago, and also we have to stop each time because we may never pass over such statements as if they are taken for granted. They can never be taken for granted. They are an anomaly. While we don't sit in judgment upon them, we just say that was a different world. In our world, they are an anomaly. And we must always register a protest and say, this is not us. Okay? Having done our duty, we can go on. Now here is a long piece of Gemara which discusses the different customs of how the Hallel was recited. We don't have to go over all of them because we've seen some of them. Some describe how the Hallel is read when a child is leading. And then we hear about the minhag when an adult is leading. Then we hear about repeating some verses, but we've seen all this already. So we don't really have to say it again. It was very difficult to make this translation because Art Scroll diverted it all and gave a completely wrong interpretation. It's unbelievable what they did. They do not respect the words of the Gemara, and they made it fit in to their custom, where they don't respect any of this, where the Hallel is just read. Again, cacophonously, as happens so often. Here and there, they sing certain verses. This is not an ancient tradition. Its aesthetic value, I shall not pass judgment on. Each person can decide for themselves what they think of it. But certainly those of us who grew up with a traditional recitation of Hallel, as I said at the beginning, can never get used to this kind of pandemonium. Hassan would read half, and the congregation would respond with the other half of the verse. And it went through without a hitch. Okay, now we pick up the Gemara, though, the later part. Because one thing we haven't looked at, and that's the question of Shomer ke'oneh. Since all these sources tell us, for instance, in the Shema, or some customs for the Hallel, Chazan reads half, and of course, some said for Shirat Hayam itself, Chazan reads half, the leader reads half, and the congregation reads the other half. Each reads their own discrete part of the verse. That means that not everyone is reading everything. So the question arose, they asked. From here, it can be inferred that listening is like responding. Though you haven't said anything, but you listened and you heard every word, it's as if you said it. So everyone has said everything, though not with their lips. They asked Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, if one listened but did not respond, is that okay? He answered them, the wise men, the school teachers, the leaders of the nation, and the preachers all say, one who listened and did not respond has discharged his obligation. Interesting words here for discharge the obligation. Yatsa. The expression is yatsa. Yatsa is short for yatsa yedei chovato, which really needs its own explanation. Chov means a debt. It occurs once in the Bible, the whole Bible once, right? In the book of Ezekiel, Chov, Chavalato, Yashiv. The good man returns his debt when he can. So we know what Chov means. There's a verb also in the book of Daniel. That's it. In the Talmud, it's very, very common. And its primary meaning is still a debt. But metaphorically, it's used in a very different sense. Yatsa yedei chovato. So people have obligations, not just in the sense that they owe someone money, which they borrowed, but much, much broader. So even doing certain mitzvot, some rabbis saw that as a kind of obligation, and it has to be discharged. So what is the minimum you have to do to discharge our obligation? And so an expression arose, Yatsa yedei chovato. He has extracted himself from the hold, from the grip of his creditor. That's basically the image. Yatsa yedei chovato. We may not like the image very much. It sounds like something very grudging. You have to do this. Okay, I had to return the mortgage, so much a month. I've done my minimum. I've done what I had to do. And then it was shortened to Yatsa. So one has to understand this vocabulary of Yatsa, Yatsa yedei chovato. That's what it said. How do we know this? That was the question. Where does Scripture teach that it's the same thing? If you hear something and you really pay attention and you absorbed it, it's as if you recited it yourself. So Rabbi Shiur ben Levi, who said in the name of our kapara, from where is it derived that listening is like responding? It is written, all the words of the scroll that the king of Judah read, that's what it says in the Bible. Now, did King Yoshiyahu ever read the words of the scroll? Surely it was Shaphan who read them, as it is written. Shaphan then read it before the king. Rather, it can be inferred from here that listening is like responding, because the Bible itself tells us that the prophet said the king read it. Because to the prophet, the voice of Torah, it was tantamount to having read it. And then you see the verses are here from 2 Kings. The high priest said he discovered the book of the Torah in the temple, and Shaphan read it. This is the English. Then Shaphan came to report to the king and told him they melted down the silver. They found the Torah, as you know, when they were doing repairs and maintenance work in the temple, and handed it over to the foreman there. Then Shaphan told the king that the high priest had given him a book, and he read it out in the king's presence. So we are told that Shaphan read it. Then the king sends them to the prophet, the great prophet, who was the prophetess, Huldah, of course. And she was, according to the Talmud, sitting in her yeshiva, Bet Ulpana. He translates in her house. But the Talmud said no, it was in Bet Ulpana. She was sitting in the yeshiva, in her yeshiva that she headed, and teaching. And they came to her there and they asked her, the king wants to know what we should do. And then she gives an answer. And she said, this is the word of the Lord, etc., as foretold in the book which the king of Judah read, Asher Kara. So there it is, black on white, that the Torah teaches. First it tells us that Shaphan read it to the king, and he listened. And then the prophet says, knowing very well the whole report, and says he read it because it's equivalent. And that's why this method of reciting is fine. Okay. There is another piece which we'll have to leave for next time.